Hello, I'm Eric Ford, and this is part of my series of Leading from Your Strengths. And this is the module on managing up, or how to build a better boss, as I like to think about it. One thought that I've had is everybody should have to wait tables at some point in their life. It's one of the most interesting, fun, and also not so fun jobs you can ever have. But it's really about managing somebody that you, in effect, work for, and that is the customer. And the way you manage those people really matters in how you succeed. So, one of the questions I often hear when I go out to eat is after the entrees have sort of been cleared, the waiter or waitress will come up and say, "Would anyone like to see a dessert menu?" And in my mind, this is a service failure on their part. In particular, I think there are five things wrong with this sort of question. And by the way, I want you to look at this picture that I've presented here. This is a restaurant in New Orleans called Arno's, and I myself worked there many, many, many years ago as a waiter. In fact, I was a captain, which is sort of one step below the maitre d'. The maitre d' sees everybody in and makes sure they get seated. The captain, the front waiter, and the back waiter are the people who actually wait on you. And the gentleman you see here, I can tell you, is a front waiter, because captains wear red vests and he's wearing a black vest. And this is a job typically done by the front waiter, by the way, and he's making what I believe to be either Bananas Foster or Cherries Jubilee. Bananas Foster is my best guess because of all the cinnamon he is sprinkling into the fire as we speak. But back to the question at hand. Why does asking somebody if they want to see the dessert menu a bad question? Well, there's several reasons. It lowers your chance of actually selling the dessert in question because people have the option of saying no. I would not give people the option of no to my "do you want a dessert" question. Instead, I would ask, what would you like for dessert? The chocolate cake, which is my favorite, or we have a wonderful blueberry crumble this evening. Something along those lines, where the choice isn't yes or no, the choice is which one. And this matters for a variety of reasons. One is waiters get paid a percent, typically by tips. 15 or 20% is often customary. And selling more increases the value of that tip. Moreover, it matters to your boss, the people who run the restaurant. Desserts tend to be a fairly high profit margin item, and they like it when you sell more. So it's a win-win. And this will be a theme we come back to throughout this lecture, talking about how to manage upward, or managing our boss. Upgrading is also contagious. People in a restaurant see what's happening at one table to the next. Again, here with this example from Arno's, it's a little bit difficult when the table next to you gets Bananas Foster or Cherries Jubilee or a Cafe Brûlot, which is a coffee drink where we pour the liquor down the orange rind and it flames up and looks very pretty, because now somebody else has had that experience. And are you going to deny that to the people you're with as a host? And in that sense, positive feedback is contagious. Another feature of desserts in particular in the dining experience, and again, this all goes back to leading upward, is shared intimacy. When you share success, when you share food, when you share in other things, it draws you closer to the person. So one of the things that's very important in your efforts to improve your relationship with your boss is making sure that when you talk about that person, you point out their successes. The other thing is creating choice sets. And this is something that you can do for your boss rather than going and asking again, shall I do this or shall I not? You can give them a set of options, and hopefully they'll pick the option that's the one you want them to take. So what is managing up? Well, this is how you build a successful working relationship with your superior, manager, or employer, depending on how you think about them. And I'm going to break this lecture into two parts. I'm going to talk about strategies for managing up in the first half, and I'm going to talk about the types of managers and how you can adjust to them in the second half. So part of what is a truism here is every time you interact with your manager, you are in fact managing up, whether you do it consciously or unconsciously, successfully or unsuccessfully. And part of it is having it in the forefront of your mind that you are trying to influence your boss when you're speaking with them. So a few things to ponder as you go into the workplace each day, in particular if you're going to see your boss every day. What do you think about when you're interacting with your boss? Are you simply trying to cut the interaction as short as humanly possible and move on? Or are you trying to learn more about their personal life and ingratiate yourself in that way? And I don't mean ingratiate as in brown nosing or sycophancy. I just mean building that interpersonal relationship that also has an out of work component. Do you have techniques or philosophies you like to follow when dealing with your boss? Are there things you know will work well with that person? When do you feel uncomfortable? What sorts of situations make you not want to interact with your boss? And I'll tell you, one of the common things that people do is they go in with a big ask without having already primed the pump. In business, many things are complicated and they're not always intuitively obvious. Therefore, it takes education. And not only is it managing up, it's educating up. And it's having discussions with your boss about a topic that you intend to make a pitch about ahead of time so that they have some information and feel that they have some knowledge about the topic before you hit them with an ask. All right. And when do you feel like you're shining or at your best? So how is managing up similar to other relationships? Well, this is really the flip side of what's going on with you and your employees, the people that work for you. You want them to manage you. You want them to bring you information in a way that's comfortable for you. So in this sense, it's two sides of the same coin, and you might want to think about it that way some of the time. All right. So there are a few things you want to do. You want to be efficient. Bosses are often under time constraints. So you want to make sure that when you're having interactions, you either have the time set aside with them so that they're not distracted by other things, or you want to be very short in your interaction. You also want to ensure as high a level of professionalism as you can typically muster. And in many ways, this shows through in your emails and other interactions that are asynchronous in how you manage your boss. And more in the workplace, we use text to go back and forth with our employers. And this is fraught with a number of issues. You can imagine emojis and other things that really aren't professional. You should more or less even text full sentences, those sorts of things. All right. So your boss actually does worry about you, at least if they're a halfway decent boss, and they'd like to know what you are doing. I give the example in some of my strategy classes about Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, fairly famous individual, Roman emperor, perhaps the first emperor, and he invaded what is modern day France. They refer to it as Gaul. And Julius Caesar would capture a village or a province, and he would send back the spoils of the war and a letter to the Senate and say, in the glory of Rome, in the name of Rome and the glory of the Senate, I have captured this village, and here are the spoils of the war. Please advise. And invariably, the Senate was getting nervous about Julius Caesar way in advance. They would send a note and say something to the effect, congratulations, Julius, please stop where you are and await further orders. We don't want you taking over the whole place. Well, unfortunately, by the time these messages got back and forth, Julius Caesar would have invariably invaded and captured the next village, province, whatever, over, and be sending back, oh, dear Senate, just got your message. Sorry, we were attacked, had to respond, captured other village. And all the time, he's telling his bosses, the Senate, who's one set of bosses, sorry, I keep disobeying you, but I keep winning. On the other hand, his other set of bosses were the people of Rome, and he kept sending letters that would be read in the open marketplaces, the forums, the gladiatorial events, talking about how Rome was having all of this great success. And I call these letters from Caesar. And actually, Caesar's diaries are a fairly famous set of readings for most historians. But this letter from Caesar idea is something you want to think about, where you give your boss routine information about the successes you are having and how their help is facilitating it and making it possible. Letters from Caesar, manage. They want to know you're doing your job. So this is an issue of presence. I often like to get there before my boss shows up and sort of leave afterwards, or at least have that perception for my boss that I'm there bracketing them. I'm always on the job, always at work. And that may or may not be true, but I certainly at least want to create that impression. The other thing is you want to make sure you're doing your job in a smart and professional manner. Ask other people that you work with to give good feedback to your boss. I know that's a difficult thing to do, but say when you do something good for a customer or somebody else, please tell my boss that you're enjoying this course, for example, or some other aspect of my work. Show them you're making good choices, etc. And again, if you have other ideas, please provide them to me as feedback. I'd like to hear. So trust and other elements of working with somebody take time. Be patient. Be calm. Bosses, particularly early on in a relationship, often want to assert themselves, and they often want to do it in ways that are not particularly constructive or helpful or even critical to getting the job done. You sort of have to weather these experiences. So get used to it, prepare yourself mentally for it up front, always try to stay calm, cool, collected, as we say, and work through things. Make sure that people understand your email and communication patterns. And it's good to tell your boss explicitly, you know, I come in the morning and do my job for the first 2 hours. I check my email at 10. If you need something before 10, please feel free to call me, because that's when I check my email. I also close out my email at 4 o'clock in case I have anything urgent I need before the end of the day, but I try not to do that to people. Know their schedule. Know what makes your boss tick. All right. The other thing is it's okay to say, I don't know. And this is one of the things we're sort of conditioned not to do for many of us, including myself. But it's always okay to say to your boss, I am not sure about the answer to that. Let me go research it, formulate an answer, and I will get back to you within, and then you have to give a time frame. That is the sort of answer that builds trust. The people who always have an answer at hand either are underemployed or are not telling you the truth. Again, communication is absolutely critical. I've talked in other instances about what I call the 5 whys. Keep asking people, why is it this way? Why is it this way? Why is it this way? Until you actually distill the issue at hand down into its pure essence. And you want to do this with the boss as well to make sure that you're addressing the real problem. One thing to remember about bosses is, like all of us, they often come with a solution to a problem even before the problem is fully explicated or understood. And that's a problem in its own right. In other words, solving problems before you know what the problem is generally tends to create yet more problems. Therefore, as an employee, this is one way where you can be a good and effective sounding board for your employer, where you provide them with feedback. What is it you're really trying to achieve? What is the question you're really trying to answer? Again, remember, I'm looking at the third bullet point here. Many people express the issue in terms of a solution. That's not the best way to go about your decision making. There are other professions, for example, architecture is fairly famous, where they really don't want to know what kind of house you want to live in. What they want to know is how you want to live in the house. Do you want to have large family gatherings in informal settings? Do you want indoor and outdoor living combined? And they'll design the house. Do not tell them, oh, I want an open kitchen and that sort of stuff. So the other thing about what bosses are thinking is you got to remember, you're not the only person in their world. In fact, they're probably dealing with 7 plus or minus 2 other people where they are sharing similar information and may or may not be providing the same sort of details. This is problematic in a number of ways, in that it's communication fidelity on their part, and we'll talk about that when you're the boss in just a few days. A lot of times bosses, and this is something where they want to seem boss-like, will tell you, I don't care about the details, just get it done. And that's a little bit problematic as well, but be cognizant of it and know how to deal with it. And again, remember, they often have data you don't. And one of the things you need to do is ask to make sure you're getting all the data. So a few strategies for improving your relationship with your employer. And the first is restating. This is sort of akin to what I call Jungian therapy, where if you're in therapy with a psychologist or psychiatrist who believes in this Jungian approach, what they will generally do is not provide you with answers. They will simply restate what you've told them already. Essentially, they're repeating back what they heard. Then you invite them, how was my version of your story incorrect? And that'll actually surface a lot of important information and details about what it is they want you to do and what a successful project will look like. And again, if you can, get them to repeat it back. If you can get this sort of double looped discursive conversation going, where they say it once, you say it once, and then they restate it in a slightly different way, this is a very good way to get better answers. And by the way, this is the sort of stuff, if you go to marriage counseling or other forms of counseling, that they use for conflict management. And I'm not saying your relationship with your boss is a conflict, but this is a good tool and approach to use early on. The next strategy is something I call reframing. And this is where you give people 2 options or more options. The other way, back to our working as a waiter, it can be the Chinese menu. And if you've ever been to a Chinese restaurant and you've got 4 or 5 people, you can say, listen, we want to do the fixed menu, and then you get to pick one of 2 soups, either the hot and sour or the dumpling soup. You get to pick 3 of 5 appetizers, the wontons, the pot stickers, the ribs, that sort of thing. And then you get to pick 2 or 3 of the entrees, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a Chinese menu. Well, you can do that with your boss as well and say, look, I want to give you 3 or 4 choices, and I'm going to even give you what I think the pros and cons of each one are without offering a solution or a preference, and let them work it out for themselves. This does a few things. This gives them ownership of both the process for making the decision and the decision itself. And they want that ownership. They want to take pride in their job. And having that ownership will mean they will invest the necessary resources so you can actually get to the successful completion of a task. The other element is persuasion. And this is something where you really need to know about yourself and also your boss. What sort of things stroke that person's ego, push their buttons, get them where you want them to be? Is there a particular time of day that works for them? Some bosses have good moods and bad moods depending on where we are in the day. They may respond different to time pressure. Some people under time pressure will default to no. Other people may respond, okay, anything, just go away. And either of those instances are okay, but you need to make sure you know which one you're in before you start pressing. All right. Self-interest. What are your boss's self-interest? What is it that will make them look successful? This is a big question, and maybe this should have been first in my list. How can we make them look successful in their boss's eyes? I alluded to this earlier. I referred to it as the magician's choice. People always want choice, or at least the illusion of choice. And that's why I call it the magician's choice. Even if there's really only one clearly dominant solution in your mind, you need to give them options in some way, shape, or form. It gives them the opportunity to assert control and confirms they're looking and paying attention. So I've talked about many of these. I'll just briefly say, know their why. Identify the prime motivations of your boss. You probably ought to be building something of a dossier on your employer, knowing the things about them that matter. You need to support their weakness. If there are things you know they're not good at, but that happen to be your strengths, be sure you're filling in that space because you become indispensable. Always try to take the high road. Your boss, chances are, is under greater stress than you are. Therefore, they're more likely to have those digressions in their interpersonal interactions even than you should be. Being able to take the high road matters. Also speak up, but give them time to respond. So again, in the same way when we're managing downward toward employees, we engage in public praise, but private concerns or reprimands. Same thing with our boss. A couple things, and I'm going to talk about bullying, and we do see a fair amount of that. Be proactive. It's better for you to go to your boss than the other way around. In many instances, when I'm a manager, I say I don't mind bad news. What I do mind are surprises. Finding out bad news from my boss or some customer rather than one of my employees, where I can go in and do corrective activities beforehand, that's very problematic for me. So I don't want to find out from my boss that something went wrong in my unit. And again, know your boss's preferences. So this is running a little bit long, and I like to break these up into 2 sections or 15-minute intervals. So I'm going to call this the intermission. If you don't mind, I'm going to get a drink of water while we do this.